So how can we, at this fabulous conference where we have been sharing our experiences, and some of us with gray hair have had quite a bit of years, and now we are turning the tables to say, I think it's really important to learn and to discover from our youth, from those in their 20s and 30s. Pretty soon, I'm going to be putting the gavel down. I'm going to be not driving anymore. My pen and computer will be closed. But what God is doing among our youth today is what he will continue to use throughout his world for generations to come. And yesterday, I guess it was only yesterday, right? We had the pre-conference about youth, and I'm going to give you a couple highlights, and then we're going to hear from our youth right here this afternoon, and you'll be able to ask some questions. But as we consider this plenary of how can the church reach the youth when they need us? So our youth are everywhere, of course, and they are growing a lot. We know that every generation there are more youth. And we learned in our pre-conference, in which we asked the question, do we, the church, engage and reach our youth? We know that the scriptures command us to do that, to train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, even when he's my age, he will not depart from it. That is a precious promise from the Lord. But we need to be thinking, are we training? Are we guiding? Are we equipping? Is the church doing that job adequately? Well, let's look at this cohort. As a youth, we learned yesterday, there are about 1.2 billion youth globally. And 1/3 of them, of that global population, of our global population, are between the ages of 10 and 24. That's a staggering number, 1/3 of us between 10 and 24. Half of them are in Asia by numbers, but in terms of percentage of the population, we need to give attention in a continuing serious way to sub-Saharan Africa. It's the only region where youth as a population continue to grow. The fertility rate in Africa overall is 4. In Niger, it's 7. And 10% of girls are mothers by the age of 16. That is a staggering number with many, many consequences. If you would like a lot more information, please consult the Population Reference Bureau. We really had some rich dialogue around those very recent stats yesterday. In terms of the issues that we recognize this presents to us as a global community and as the church, certainly the issue of sexuality, certainly early marriage, education. Half of the kids at secondary level in sub-Saharan Africa are not in school. Alcohol, obesity, tobacco, lack of exercise. We know that not only are the issues that we've been concerned about very much in our work globally concerning diarrhea, malnutrition, those things. Now we see these other issues from more of the Western countries really impacting our youth in terms of lack of exercise, obesity, gender norms. And actually, we talked about yesterday the faith community. Is it positive or is it negative? Are we doing the job that God's called us to do? We had roundtable discussions, and each one of us were asked to bring 3 main points from the roundtables, and I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm going to highlight one from each of the roundtable. The roundtable about HIV and youth. We need a biblical approach. Okay, sometimes we have a cultural or a traditional approach, but we may not be giving a truly biblical approach. We need, in reproductive health education, we talked about body literacy, engaging church structures and youth pastors. In terms of family planning in youth, what kind of family do you want to have? And engage in open, honest discussion surrounding that question. Humanitarian settings. The church is the place where people go during instability. And how prepared are we? Child marriage, the biblical meaning of marriage. Sometimes we assume that we are living those marriages, but in reality, we are not truly either living them as older adults or not really speaking about them effectively. The critical concerns we're going to talk about and think about right now engage some of these questions that came from yesterday. The church preaches that sex belongs only in marriage, but in the real world, that doesn't always happen. The church does not speak about sexuality. And is there a lesser evil when it comes to discussing contraception? So those were some of the actual comments and questions from roundtables yesterday. And as we consider the youth of our world and invite, at this time, some youth to come and dialogue with us, we want to dig a little bit deeper. We want you to be prepared with your questions, but we want to hear from their experience. So welcome. We have a wonderful panel with us this afternoon. And I want to especially thank Samuel. He's on the hot seat as the only guy. So we're expecting you to have all the answers for us, Samuel, when it relates to those deep questions about, what are the guys doing? So I'm going to take a seat and we'll pass the microphone around. I hope you all can see us around the corner a little bit. But we're going to start with Jerilyn. Jerilyn is a missionary kid. She grew up in Philippines and Papua New Guinea, right? Yeah. And is a nurse and has worked quite extensively in different regions of the world. And we welcome you, Jerilyn, to give us a little bit of comment about what does it mean for you as you look at youth and your own experience.
Well, thanks, everyone. I'm really glad to be here with you all for the rest of the weekend. As Debbie mentioned, I grew up as a missionary kid in the Philippines and in Papua New Guinea, and was quite the committed church kid from the very beginning. So much so that the first memory I have is associated with the church. It was just before I turned 4 years old, and my parents were the visiting missionaries at a vacation Bible school. And I can remember praying that night by the side of my bed with my mom and my dad to become a Christian. And that's the very first memory I have. As I continued to get older, I kept doing all of the quintessential good church kid things. Because my parents were missionaries, I shared with churches all about my family's ministry work and how excited I was about that. Memorized lots of scripture, went to church camp. As I got older, those things changed a little bit and included Bible studies, mentors, prayer partners, and daily times of prayer and Bible reading. All of the things that we often ask kids to do. I was really invested in growing in my faith and in being committed to the church. And at the time, all of those activities were one of the main ways that I measured my growth or measured my progress. I recently met a young man who grew up in the church just like I did through my work. He's Guatemalan, and his family started churches in rural areas of the country. They would go to church sometimes 3 times a week, where he helped play the piano and he was part of youth groups there. But there was something really different about Mario. When he was in elementary school, he realized that he was attracted to men. And he didn't feel he had anyone he could talk with about this. And that he told me that it became his ultimate secret, that he knew he could never tell anyone. Despite his family trying to believe it into not being true, They knew about it, and they never talked about it in front of him except to make jokes in cruel and mean-spirited ways in front of him and his friends. When he confided in pastors, they told him he was definitely not saved and condemned by God. He distanced from the church for many years and grew to hate himself for his sexuality. He felt really depressed and he felt very hopeless. And unfortunately, this culminated for him in an attempt to end it all and take his own life at the end of a rope. Not surprisingly, he told me that he understands why many people permanently leave the church after experiences like his. But he said that that never made sense for him because the only reason that he was still alive was because of God. I asked him if there could have been something that he would have needed to hear at the time that his friends or his church or his family could have said. And he said that I was unconditionally worthy of being loved. He now believes that God loves me as I am, as I was born, and that I'm special and I was sent to this world with a special mission. My story and Mario's have many similarities. We were both raised in the church where we were heavily involved in the faith activities that we often use to measure progress and use to measure whether or not youth are engaged in the church. But because of our identities, we were treated drastically differently. He hated himself because he was reflecting internally how he was responded to by his friends and family and the church community around him, whereas I was given positive feedback at almost every turn. And while honest pursuit of God through all of those faith activities did bring me praise, I can remember one point in college sitting in church and looking around at all of the people in the pews around me and just wondering. I wondered if they were experiencing something different with God or with faith than I was, because I felt really tired. I felt tired of all of the ways that I had measured my faith to that point and kind of scared and worried that maybe that was all there was. Father Greg Boyle said, God can get tiny if we're not careful. So as we come together to discuss our desire to reach young people with the transformative spirit of Christ, experiences like Mario's make me wonder, is there space in the church for people like Mario, just as there's always been space for me? Because if we as the church want to welcome youth, we have to be willing for them to come fully as they are and be ready to meet them exactly where they are. We have to, I think, as Christ called us over and over again to do, we have to be willing to get a little bit messy and learn as we invest in the lives of the people around us. Because our young people can tell the difference between us saying that we love them and actually investing and living alongside them.
Wow, Jerilyn, that was powerful. And I'm going to ask each of them a question or two at the end of their comments. They don't know what they are because they were based on their reflection. At the end, we will give you an opportunity to ask questions. So, Jerilyn, that was a powerful comparison that you gave with Mario. And it made you vulnerable as well, even to bring that topic to us at a forum like this. What has given you strength to do that? You mentioned Mario himself and that experience, but how are you as a young person strengthened to present challenging, difficult experiences that you have faced?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's not really, it just comes from the experiences that I've had. So I work at a community health clinic in downtown DC, and when I started working there, I really didn't know a whole lot about all of this. But over the last 2 years working there, I've heard so many stories from all of the young men and women that I work with, some of whom are from the gay and lesbian and transgender communities, some of whom are not, some of whom are HIV positive, some of whom are not. And I've learned so much from all of the people that I work with there. And I think at the end of the day, I can remember really just not knowing how to approach all of this when I started working there. But what I came to was that at the end of the day, I'm a nurse, and my job as a nurse and as a Christian is to make sure that the patients that are under my care have the opportunities that they need to be as healthy as possible. And I knew that I could care for people regardless of what I thought of any of the other things at the time. And it's been something that's continued to bring new thoughts and new ideas to my mind over the past 2 years of working there at the clinic.
Thank you, Jerilyn, so much. I think she's brought to my mind the example of the woman who discovered that just touching the hem of Jesus would bring exposure to something that was far richer and deeper, that needed to be told, a story that needed to be told. And thank you for your willingness to encourage us with your life story. We're going to move on to Nana. Nana from Ghana, right? That's how she has famously told me who she is. But she is so vivacious and vibrant, I am not going to steal any time from her. She will stage beautifully for us her own experience.
Thank you. So as Debbie mentioned, my name is Nana. I'm glad to be here. I'm from Ghana originally, but I've lived in the US for quite some time, so you might notice my accent's maybe acclimated. But my parents have always told me when I was young, I was a very curious child. I wanted to know why, how, where, when, and who, and also really like telling stories. For the last 5 years, I've been a researcher, which is a dream come true for such a child. And just in being invited here to speak, I just reflected on that a little bit. And really what I found in the last 5 years working at the Institute for Reproductive Health at Georgetown University, working with both lay and faith-based organizations, is that this audience, especially the church, has a really incredible opportunity to hear and tell the stories of youth. And the best way to do that we've seen really, is to engage them in research and to give them a chance to really portray their voice. And for us as researchers to bring that voice to other people in a very diverse way. So from our perspective, really again, as a research organization, really, how do we leverage the youth voice for both designing and evaluating programs? A lot of the church programs are done without a lot of gratitude at times, and really would benefit from highlighting the research and the results, and the youth really are that way of doing that. And we have some recommendations for how we could do that. In terms of the first piece, really adjusting our frame of mind in that they are young people, they're flighty, they can't really tell the truth. And we found that they are actually reliable informants on their story. They can very adequately tell you those stories with great detail and confidence and pride, even in some of the most challenging situations. We've worked in Rwanda, Nepal, Uganda, and DRC, where we've worked with community-based organizations and academic organizations who work with youth, and really find that they earn their trust of the youth, and they also engage them in conducting the research. The key is to use age-appropriate methods. So we often work with adolescents from 10 to 19, especially for that younger group. You know, you might have to ask them true or false questions by having them run to that tree if they agree, and to maybe the rock over there if they disagree, so that you can spend the time and not have them be bored and sort of lose attention. The other thing is really to be creative. You might have to go where they are. So you can't bring them to you all the time. They might be at a youth center, or they might be at home. They might be in a field working. So how do you do that? You have to really think of other ways to reach them. But at the same time, as a research organization, be ethical and make sure that you can protect their privacy and keep their information confidential, whether you're collecting it on paper or electronically. And then the last bit really is sharing the results, not just the results of the project itself, but their experiences. Did they like participating in the project? Did they not like it? What did they like about it? And how could we maybe do more of what they like and maybe less of what they don't like? and really making adjustments according to what they are telling us. And in that, there's sort of this extra bonus for those of us that are doing programming and research, in that it really adds value to the work that we're doing. So not only will the participatory evaluation methods bring good results for us, but bring good results for them and make them feel that they are more a part of what we are doing, and that it's for them and not sort of just taking advantage of their perspective or their stories. And I think something that we found in disseminating our research also is to have them be at the table, not just designing it, but also then being there to tell their stories in a non-tokenistic way. I think it's so easy to say, we're having a meeting and we're inviting the youth, and we kind of truck them in or have them come with a chaperone and they kind of speak for 2 minutes and that's it. But really having them be part of the entire process from the beginning to the end. So if you're interested in learning more about any of our research, we love telling stories with pictures. You can go to our website and find out more. And I'm happy to talk to any of you afterwards as well.
So, Nana, you said we need to adjust our minds, our thinking. And I think sometimes some of the most staid people are church leaders. We've always done it this way. We can find some basis for our actions, whether it's tradition or sometimes a particular interpretation of the scriptures. So in that situation, when you might find research that might be a bit controversial with a state of mind, what do you do?
So this especially since the Institute for Reproductive Health, we often run into this where we are discussing the social norms that underlie family planning use and or even just puberty transitions. And so we look at the key points where maybe they're going through puberty or they're getting married, they're having children, and really tricky situations with the faith leaders. But I think the basis even there is to have an open mind with the faith leaders. And we have worked with Christian, so Catholic and Protestant, as well as Muslim populations and several other religious leaders. And the key really is to say that we are here to hear you and to understand better what it is that you're doing. And I think, I was recently in the DRC. We have an intervention working with young parents and newly married couples through their church leaders. So we have these community dialogues that are in the church with the couples. And the leaders really, we brought them together for a session, a training, and they stated, thank you for coming in and doing research on our norms. What do we actually think, and not coming in with a prescribed idea. And really, I think having the faith that there's room for dialogue, that not just the project participants, but those that are at the table as well. And it's sometimes tricky because you have to stop and just take a pause and see how you can come back at it from a different perspective. But at the same time, we found that some of those faith leaders are the ones who are pushing the envelope. And those champions can be the ones who also make change happen. So I think that those are maybe two of the ways that we've tried to do that.
Thank you so much, Nana. We're going to come to Rhona. And Rhona is from Uganda and has lived in a number of places, most recently Rwanda, and now here in Baltimore. So, Rhona, I know you've had some very fascinating experiences as a young person, sort of straddling cultures and continents and people, and have been extremely gracious, at least to me, in understanding and contributing. So we welcome you.
Thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon. It's quite the honor to be a participant in this conversation. So thank you. Please excuse me, I have the sniffles. As Debbie introduced, I was born and raised in rural Western Uganda, and I grew up with my 5 siblings. Was raised by a single mother who actually heavily relied on the local church, a Catholic church, because I was raised Catholic, to actually put food on the table through its social initiatives, and send my siblings and I to school. I came to the US about 11 years ago for college for the first time, and managed to do my master's and join World Relief in the Baltimore office, headquarter office, for a number of years, supporting some of our programs in Africa. And 2.5 years ago, I went back, this time to Rwanda, as a director of programs there. And as I've reflected on the theme of this session, how the church can reach youth when they need us, so that can be read in many ways, where they need us and how they need us. And also reflected on my own personal background and the current work that I'm involved in. Excuse me. I've thought to share a little bit about a program that I was involved in directly supporting the last 2+ years in Rwanda. It's a program called 12+. It's World Relief Rwanda has been implementing this program for 3 years now. Excuse me. And its aim is to empower young adolescent girls in 10 districts in Rwanda to make better and informed choices about their lives, and to build their health and social and economic assets during the transition to puberty. And over 33,000 girls have actually gone through the 10 cycle program in the last 3 years. World Relief's mission, of course, is to empower the local church to serve the most vulnerable. And so in most of our programming, especially in Christian majority contexts like Rwanda, engaging the local church directly and integrally in these programs is vital to the implementation and the delivery of the program outcomes. As I've looked at and reflected on my own experience as a young person growing up in Uganda and now involved in the development work, one of the things that I really appreciate and treasure about the 12+ program, as I've supported it, has been its intentional and strategic focus on building the skills of young girls from very early on to have voice and choice. There have been many times as I've participated in a 12+ gathering, these gatherings that happen on a weekly basis, or looked at the curricula that the program has, that I've so desperately wished that this kind of program was available to me when I was growing up as well. In most sub-Saharan African contexts, it is, and this is true for the context that I grew up in as well, there's a rather narrow mold of traditional expectations on what a girl should be, what a girl should do, what a girl should say, what a girl should become, really. And often this is reinforced in schools. It's reinforced even in the church. And for me, it's not until I came to the US for the first time for college that I actually realized that I had a voice, and not just a voice, but that I could actually, I was permitted to use that voice, and that I had a say in things like what my vocation would be and what major I would study. I came to the US and based on some of the cultural expectations and the academic system back home, you have to study to become something very specific. You have to be a doctor or an accountant or something that has some sort of title that means something. So when I came out to the US for college, I thought, you know what, I like math, so I'll be, people that like math become accountants and make money or count other people's money or whatever. So I'll be an accountant. And so I majored initially in accounting, and the idea for me when I went to college, and I went to Taylor University in Upland, Indiana, our lovely small Christian liberal arts university that had like 12 black people. But those are long tangent stories. But I was baffled by the idea that someone could actually go to college and spend 2 or 3 years in college without a degree, without declaring a major. You know, the idea of being undeclared was preposterous to me. So I thought, hey, I'll study accounting. And a couple years into my degree, I realized that I actually enjoy economics. My economics courses more than I do my accounting courses. And so I switched over to a new degree at the time that Taylor had called developmental economics, much to the horror of my mother and my family back home, because they couldn't fathom, you know, what does a development economics person do or become. It didn't quite roll off the tongue as easily as an accountant, if you will. But you know, the realization that I had a choice in who I could be and what I could do and the things that I enjoyed and could actually take that step for me was a revelation. World Relief focuses heavily in working with the local church in social and development programming for many reasons. Excuse me. And one of the important ones, I think, is that the church is very uniquely positioned to address the heart issues, not just the mind issues that the government or other very secular or civil society organizations or institutions are positioned to address, but really the heart issues that actually make a difference in the long term when it comes to behavior change and cultural shifts, especially in terms of shifting cultural norms that sometimes have negative implications on the value that girls, especially in this context, may have or may think that they have about themselves and that the choices available to them. So for me, that's been, I think, one of the thoughts that I wanted to bring to this discussion, especially in relationship to girls. I could talk about gender issues in Africa forever. But yeah, so that's for me a particular and personal touch point, I think, especially in terms of how to engage youth, where they are and when we can engage them. So thanks.
Very much. So we are connections, Christian connections for international health, and I know that 12 Plus program have girls, I think about 25, connecting every week. What advantage do you see youth having in connecting to each other, and how can we enhance that, increase it, encourage it, support it better?
Thank you. One of the things that I've been thinking about in relation to your question, Debbie, on connection, especially among youth themselves, and this directly ties into this 12 Plus program analogy. One of the key components of the program design for 12 Plus is a mentorship component. So the World Relief works every year with about 600 young women between the ages of 18 and 24 who are trained and capacitized and empowered to actually lead the weekly gatherings and learning journeys and sessions with the much younger 15,000 every year girls, that pre-adolescent girls, and that for me has been a revelation. We all, I think, can understand and appreciate the value that mentorship brings to the lives of young people. Good mentorship, godly mentorship, good role models, and what a difference the mentors in your lives and the mentors in my life have made in the person that I am becoming. But I think for me, I've been marinating over the fact that it's not just been valuable for these young 10 to 12-year-old girls, to have these slightly older girls that are leading their sessions, that are from their communities, that are becoming their friends, that are becoming their role models as part of this program. It's equally been vital, and this is one of the biggest outcomes out of these 12+ programs, to give and provide opportunity to these older girls and young women in the ages of 18 to 24, the opportunity to actually be mentors themselves. The challenge and expectation that, you know what, you can actually bring value to the growth and learning journey of somebody else with whatever you are. And I think that expectation and that empowerment has been amazing to watch as these young women, for the very first time, are being given responsibility and being charged with looking after and empowering and educating and teaching and really living their lives in such a way that they're good role models to the younger girls, the pre-adolescent girls in this program that they are intentionally and strategically supporting. So for me, that connection has been incredibly valuable, not just the value of the value that we all get from mentorship, but the value that we can also, and the growth that can come for us as well, and the transformation that comes with that for us as well, when we're presented with opportunities to actually step up and mentor and pour into other people. I look at my life at the moment, and I'm always challenging myself, who around me am I mentoring as well? Because I think sometimes it's so easy to think, I don't have anything to offer. I'm so young myself, and I still have quite a bit to learn from others. But realizing that, there are actually other people that are now looking at me and saying, Rhona, how do you do that? Or how have you gotten to this one stage? And me realizing, I actually do have quite a bit, and can I be intentional about looking behind me, or walking alongside somebody else?
Thank you. That's a valuable thought for us here as well, to consider how can we continue mentoring one another even through our connections in CCIH. Thank you, Rhona. So Samuel, you have an honorable spot. You're not only last with the last word, but you're our man of the hour. So we invite you now to share from your experience as a young man.
Hello. I'm Samuel, and I come from a small town in Kenya called Naivasha. Maybe how you relate to this town is because we do send a lot of flowers to Europe and other countries, because here you love flowers. Now, I grew up in church, and this is because my parents were very adamant of the importance of going to church. And I can see myself carrying my two sisters on a bicycle and going to church every day, every Sunday. And to some extent, this was sometimes coerced because you want to stay home. But looking back, I really appreciate them doing this. We weren't alone. We had some other folks who were going to church with us. And I will say that the early days of going to church were okay, and up to some point where some of the youths will start making their own decisions, or at least these have some freedom of what they want to choose. And so this is the point where we lost most of them. And one of the things that I will say that we lost them along the way, and this is where the youth now, we are defining them when they come from being toddlers, and now they're becoming adolescents and getting to the 20s of their life. This is where we are losing them. This is where the issues of sexuality, reproductive health are coming in. And I think somehow the church has become rigid in how it's responding to some issues. It has a way of doing things. I know, for example, in my church, it took time for us to dance in church to some musics. they will say that this is how we sing standing and nothing else. Or you cannot stand before people when you don't have a tie, and that's it. But maybe a youth wants to dress differently, listen to some kind of music. There are some things that have changed over time that church really doesn't want to accept. And I believe there's still a way of delivering the gospel without watering down the real concept about Jesus and Christianity, in that we can make church relevant to the youth today. The other thing I think where we lose them is because we are paying too much attention on what is wrong, and we are so constant to disapprove the youths, yeah? We are, when you think of your adolescent boy, you're always thinking of how naughty he is, not how maybe he's doing good on other things. We're not appreciating their talents, what their hobbies are, or what their aspiration is in life is. We're always telling them, don't do this, don't do that, but we aren't saying, you did good on this or that. Now, I'm a living example of, or a product of the church myself, and I appreciate so many things that the church has done for me. I think I've been in church for long enough to even work in church or get educated in church, and I'm a living example that really the church really works. And I remember one day when we had a lesson about sexuality, there's one preacher who told us one day that I know all of you have feelings in the opposite sex, and but I want to tell you one thing. Think of yourself as an ovum. An ovum is the reproductive unit of a female. And when we were learning biology, we were being told that the ova will accept only one sperm, and the moment it is fertilized, it becomes fibrous to the rest, okay? Meaning that no other can come in. So think of yourself as an ova, and all the girls around you are sperms, yeah? Yeah, keep them at arm's length, okay? And until when you accept one, and then you become fibrous and keep that. So some of these lessons, when I remember them, they help me really relate to some kind of analogy that will help me face some of these things in life. And I believe the church has that example to do it. Now, wearing my health system glasses, I will think of the church adopting what already is happening in the health systems. When you think of the problems of the youth, can you think of them as diseases? What is the health system doing to respond to the diseases? A health system has healthcare workers, it has information, it has products to give to the people who are sick. It has a big range of service delivery to offer. It has been defined in a way of some governance, and there are resources to attend to this. So I think if the church took some of the examples from what has already worked in the health systems to apply it in church, we as doctors, as pharmacists, we go to church, but how are we using that skill in the church? Are we utilizing them? When it comes to information systems, how much do we know about the youths? Do we collect information about them? Do we really know what we really want them to do in their lives? So I think if the church informs itself and gives itself some kind of knowledge or understanding the youths in terms of their demographics, what changes they are going through, what feedback we get from them, what is not working for them. I think if we gather all this information, then we'll make informed decisions to address their issues. But if we sit at the church and we only see the youths, we don't involve them even in the governance structure. When you look at some of the African elders in church, you will not find any youths there. You will think that they have no say, but they have some say in whatever they are doing in church. So I think we need to improve the church system so that it is able to respond appropriately to the youth at all stages in their lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. You have honored your chair very well. So I know you have a son, correct? Is it a young son? 1 year? Is that right? So when you think about your own opportunity you had as a young person and a youth leader that influenced you, what would you like your son's future youth leader to be like?
Oh, well, I want my son to have some guidance all along the way. I believe as a man who has gone through all the stages that he is supposed to go through, there are very many lessons that are available for him to learn without experiencing the problems that I have experienced already. So I believe there will be answers all along in every stage of his life. And I believe if there will be someone next to him to tell him this is the way and this is the road, he should make a very good man in the future. And I believe the church is there to do it. The only thing that I will say that I want to have that close relationship with him so that he'll be able to open up and be free with me to tell me that thing that he really wants to say and not have to seek advice elsewhere. So I will want to be really close to him, or at least create an environment that will make him speak out rather than go find answers elsewhere. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. So it is your turn now. We have about 10 minutes until picture time, right? Isn't it picture time? And I know you are bursting with some comments or questions, so feel free.
Yeah, I have a question. I have 3 sons, one who's 28, one who's 26, and one who's 19. So I'm dealing with, and Samuel Polisana, you're going to get this very soon, all of this. They were raised in the church and they understand some basic principles and so on. But I think the challenge that I see, none of you have talked about it. To me as a father and potentially a grandfather, who knows, technology. I see this as an evil. My father didn't like me to have a typewriter, and for good reason. Anyway, I think technology has actually gone far beyond what we thought it would do, and it's a question I'd like the young folk to answer. Having to deal with this with my own kids who are completely consumed 24 hours a day, which is too much. And then a second question, which Jennifer brought up a little bit, which is, for me, the young people, the biggest and most important social issue for them is identification. And this is their universal acceptance of people for who they are, which is a very common thing now with our millennial kids and kids who are even younger. And that poses a challenge for the church, a very serious challenge. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to accept whoever is as is without any moral judgment. And that to me is very interesting because that makes the church have to think about things very seriously. So I just want to put those two things out there, and maybe you have some comments about that.
So I will say right from the get-go that I am someone that works with information communications technology for development. So I will probably be on the other end of that and think that technology actually has some really great opportunities for us to reach young people. I know that in my own church community that many people use their phones as their Bibles. They access the Bible on their phones. They are able to get daily Bible verses. They are able to have discussions with other people also using their phones. And so I think recently our church launched an app to where you could give your offering, your tithes online or like through the app, you know what's happening. The events are online. We also have an online community. And so just really a great chance to bridge the gaps between different people and also to expose us to things from our faith. Obviously, I think, I have a almost 5-year-old and almost 2-year-old, and it's exactly, they could stay on the phone and just keep swiping and playing even at that young age. And I think we have a responsibility as wiser, mature Christians to also give them a sense of identity, who they are, so that when they do encounter things that are negative in technology, whether on Facebook or Twitter, wherever, that they're able to sift through that. I don't think a isolationist approach is necessarily the best, because even from my adolescent years, I know that when you tell me don't look at that, that's probably the thing I'm going to go and look at first. And in our research at IRH, we've got the adolescents. It's intriguing. It's a sort of a mixed up time period, and I think even into the 20s, a lot of sort of sorting through things, and I think it's about giving them the tools to be able to sort out wisely and giving them a good early footing so that they can, figure those things out. As a parent myself, I know I'm not always there, even now at this age, and I certainly won't be in their high school or their college to sort of say, do this, don't do that, go to this person, don't go to that person. But what seeds can we sow from the beginning and continue to sort of, I think you use the term walk alongside of them, really helping them to navigate for the future and then being with them alongside. So I think those are sort of maybe just things that I will use to answer both of those questions.
Are there identity questions?
I had a mentor during college who was really influential for me at Cedarville University, where I went to school for nursing, who used to say that when you can see people as God sees people and tell them that you can see that in them, that can change lives. And one of the things that has so struck me with all of the people, the wonderful people I've met through my work, is how many people are making some pretty destructive choices in their lives because they don't feel like they're worth taking care of. And I've had young people that have made some really risky choices and really risky decisions, and we've been sitting in my office, and I've just said, you're worth taking care of, and you're worth making a choice to help keep yourself well and help keep yourself healthy. And I've had people cry when they hear that, because that's just something that I don't think we always do the best job of affirming. And another professor who used to say that we should eulogize people while they're still alive and tell the people in our lives how they matter to us and why they matter, because it's not always understood as much as we maybe think it is.
Other questions?
Now, August 2016, there was an article that Christianity Today published, and it was based upon a 250 church survey in 40 states. And this is just in the United States, and it may have transcultural application, it may not. But the title of the article was Put Away the Skinny Jeans. And it basically, the survey determined, and had pretty good data to support it, that music, the attire of the pastor really had nothing to do with the attraction toward young people at the churches. And what they found is that what really attracted them is just what Nena and Samuel had mentioned, is incorporation of the young people into body life, and also the relationships that develop between old people and the youth, based upon the old person putting attention to them, getting into their world, hearing their stories, and affirming them as members of the body of Christ. And anyway, so that research, I think, has been helpful, I think, for it sort of affirms something of what you've said there. So thank you.
Thank you for that contribution. Great.
Thank you for sharing the youth, the future of our nations. What is it that you didn't like in your upbringing? So what is it that you didn't like in your upbringing? I mean, you've all said very nice things about your parents, But what is it that you actually didn't like? I'm saying this because I would also often ask my girls, and I say, so what is it that you didn't like in my upbringing you? And when they would argue, I would tell them, don't interfere with my motherhood. You two, you will be mothers. And they would tell me what they didn't like. What they didn't like was that I would fill my house with my nieces and my nephews. And in Zambia, it's like that. And even nephews that had parents, but because they felt that our home was better, so they would all congregate in my house for many years. And they were able to tell me now that that's what they didn't like, and that's what they would do differently. You've all praised your parents, but there must be something that you didn't like in your upbringing that you would do differently as you raise your children.
Oh boy. So we open the can of worms. I think for me, maybe not what I didn't like, but what I would have liked. So I'll rephrase it that way. What I would have liked growing up was an example of what an honoring, an example of a stable marriage between my parents, between not even just my parents, but the many, aunties and extended family. I can think through my immediate and extended family back home, and there's only one couple that's still married right today, just one couple. And for me, that was something that I would have liked to see, or to grow up in a home where there's actual respect between the two people, especially for the woman. And I think for me, I grew up with an alcoholic father, and he was quite abusive to my mother and to our siblings. And one of his biggest regrets was that he had 4 daughters. So my mother bore him 5 children, and the 4 oldest are all girls. So she kept trying until she got him a boy. And after my oldest sister, he didn't want to name any of us. My mother had to name the rest of us, and the 4 of us that came after my oldest sister all Catholics, because my mother was Catholic, because he refused to even baptize any of us in his Protestant faith. There were all these things, and so for me, one of the reasons why I'm very passionate about gender issues in Africa is because of the things that I grew up wishing that I could see or experience towards my mother or the older women in my life, and then the relationships that they had with their spouses or significant others, as well as to the myself as a girl, and my sisters as well. So for me, that example of what an honoring, faithful, stable marriage looks like would have been something that, so if you've given that to your children, God bless you. I resonated with something that you said, because one of the things that my mother did as well growing up, she raised 6 of us, but she also raised so many other cousins and other kids that sometimes I ask her, what, Mommy, how is this person related to us again? Can you sort of remind me of but she has raised so many people in our home, it's not until I came to the US for college that I had never had a towel to myself, like a towel. That because there were just never enough to go around, and you sort of just shared whatever was available. I had never slept in a bed that was like my bed. How you've, I don't know whether any of you have ever had the experience of sleeping with people on a mat or a bed where you to try and maximize space, your head is head and feet. Yeah, you feel me. Yes, you're opposite. You're trying to maximize all the space, so you put your head next to the other person's feet, and they do the same. That kind of thing. And just because there were so many people in our home really when we were growing up. And the funny thing is, my mother always, like when she would serve food, she always served everybody else first and her own biological children last. Like she always put us at the end of that proverbial line. If she was passing out a little bit of school fees, because there was never, enough to like pay for everybody at the same time completely, she would always pay for her own actual kids last. And that always bothered me, She would forget my birthday, but she would not forget my cousin's birthday. And so it's not until, a few years ago, I sat her down and actually really had this conversation and asked her. And she said, you know what, Rhona, I always lived with this worry that if I took care of my own first, that I would not be able to, I would not do all that I could to take care of everyone else's children, and yet they were my responsibility too, and the only way I could ensure that everybody ate something, that everybody got something, was if I took care of everyone, of all the other children first, because I could not bear the thought of my own children going without, So I would, she has this, and she can't go off in her local language, she's saying, I would even, sell my underwear, as crude as that may sound, to make sure that you ate, if I put you at the end of the line, and that way everybody would eat, And so for me, it's not until I've sort of grown a little bit and had some of these conversations that I've actually appreciated things that I didn't appreciate growing up, or things that I detested growing up, and I thought, oh, the world was coming to an end and life was so unfair and all of that. So I don't know. Anyway, I appreciate that about you.
Okay, we are about finished, but we're going to give the final word to Samuel, okay? So wrap it up, Samuel. Do a good job.
Maybe just to answer that question, and maybe I would say that one thing that will apply to many is that advice really comes when there is a crisis. And in most cases, you'll find that really, will you take time to really talk about issues when nothing has really happened, nothing bad has really happened, where it's quite spontaneous and free, where there's no any kind of conflict that has taken place, where you give some advice. Because it's at that point when you have a crisis, then you remember what mom said. But at times when we tend to only say, we need to talk when some kind of beef have taken place, then we lose the point and we look at it like we are only being disapproved all the time. And that's when we get the chance to be advised. Yeah.
An apt word that should go on your apt, Nana, for your church.